Hello, in this video I'm going to show you how to put together a ponytail scrub cap that ties with a ribbon and is lined with satin. Now I've already gone ahead and cut my pattern pieces. If you need help in figuring out how to cut your fabric, you can refer to the description section of this video. There's a link there for how to do that in another ponytail scrub cap video that I put together a while back. The reason I'm putting this video together is because I have modified my scrub cap pattern pieces slightly since that video, and I also wanted to show you how to add lining to the same style of scrub cap. So what you will need to do is get the pattern pieces, whether you're using the old ones or the new ones, the process is still the same. And you're going to cut one cap top out of fabric and one out of lining, and the same with the fabric side, one out of fabric and one out of lining, and then you only need the one out of fabric for the headband tie. You do not need lining for the tie, and that will make more sense as the process goes along. Just wanted to let you know a couple of things that I modified in these pattern pieces and why, if you want to give it a try, I would encourage you to do so. So this is actually the scrub cap top. So if you I'm going to open this for you. So this is what the pattern looks like. And I've made it a little bit wider than my original pattern, just so that you have a bit more room around the sides of your head and it fits a bit more comfortably. If you like the fit of the original one, then you can just disregard these modifications. But another thing that I've done to these pattern pieces is that I've taken the side piece and I've made what is the pouch area a little bit longer, which gives you more room for your hair if you have a lot of hair or curly hair and you don't want it to be constricted. So this pattern piece extends about to 18 3/4 of an inch instead of, I think the original was 17. So I've added almost 4 inches total if you were to double this, because this piece is on the fold. So those are basically the modifications. Also for the headband tie, you'll notice that when I line them up, the headband tie is slightly shorter than your side, and that's because I've noticed, as I've put many of these together, that when I go to join the headband to the side, the headband, as I stretch it and I try to fold it and whatnot, it tends to lose a little bit of integrity, and it ends up feeling bigger than the headband tie, than the side of the ponytail cap. So when I go to attach it, this is my center notch right here. If I pull a little bit, it will be able to fit a little bit better. If I pull this as I'm sewing, when I go to fold the headband tie onto itself, it will give me a slightly better fit. So just wanted to mention that those are the modifications, but let's start putting it together. So for this version of the ponytail cap, we are basically doing what we do to the fabric, to the lining as well. For most of the parts, there's one seam that only applies to the fabric and not the lining. But the first thing you want to do is put your fabric right sides together for the side, and you're going to join the back. Now remember that my pattern pieces all have a 1/4 inch seam allowance already included. So you're going to stitch a 1/4 inch. If a 1/4 inch doesn't seem comfortable, then you can adjust the pattern pieces by giving them more seam allowance before you cut your fabric. But if a 1/4 inch works for you, then you're going to go to your machine and you're going to stitch a 1/4 inch here and also a 1/4 inch in your lining. Okay, so now my two pattern pieces are stitched in the back, center back seam, and I don't need to finish those edges because it will be encased inside each other. The next step is to take your cap front for both the lining and the actual fabric, and you're going to make it so that you see a notch, the center front notch of the cap side. Now remember, the straight part is what goes with the headband. The curved one is what's going to go with the cap top. So find the curved part of your headband, of your cap side, and make it so that the right side is facing you. You're going to match this center front notch to the center front notch of your cap top. Remember that the cap top has 2 notches on either side of the center front. That's one way to tell it apart from the center back notch that doesn't have anything else here. So find the one that's a center front with 2 notches here. You're going to put it so that the right sides are together, And I like to start at center front and go all the way around, stitching at a 1/4 inch seam allowance, matching my notches as I go along. We're going to attach both of those, and we will do the same thing to the lining. Again, find a curved side, open it up so that the right side is facing you. And this you can see more clearly, the 3 notches. This is my center front and the 2 on either side. You will look for the same setup on your cap top. This is not it. So it's this one. Right sides together, matching center front, stitch all the way around. When you get to the center back, try to align the center back notch to that center seam we just created. I wanted to pause for a moment and tell you that I use stretch satin. This is a polyester satin. It is not silk, so polyester does not have as much give as the cotton fabrics that I use for my caps. So I highly recommend that you save yourself the headache of going with satin that is not stretch. So you see this has a lot of give, which helps me when I go to attach it, because as I sew the 2 pieces together later, because polyester doesn't give as much, it's going to feel a lot shorter than your cotton. The cotton is a lot more giving, just the nature of the fabric and the weave of quilting cotton. It kind of tends to stretch a little bit, whereas this, if this was not stretch satin, I would not be able to do this. So if you cannot get your hands on some stretch satin, then I suggest that you add a little bit when you go to put your pattern piece on. When you go to cut, maybe then add a little bit of fabric. So put your fold here. Let me move this over so it's clear. When you go to cut, if you're not using stretch, give yourself maybe a 1/4 inch extra at the fold before you cut, because you're going to need that when you join it to your cap. I've learned this the hard way from experience, having to recut or redo caps because it just wasn't fitting right. So I've learned that stretch is much easier to work with. Anyhow, I'm going to go ahead and stitch these 2 things together, and I'll be right back. So here's what your 2 pieces look like right now. Notice that I have my lining inside out and my cap is right side out. One other thing that I did on the sewing machine while I was there is that I pressed the seam that I created by joining the cap and the sides. I pressed that seam towards the cap side, and then on the right side of the fabric, I started out on the center back seam and I stitched all the way along really close to the seam edge on the cap side. Not on the cap top, but the cap side. I just stitched all the way along there to keep that seam down. Again, I didn't have to finish this raw edge on the lining or the cap because I'm about to join them together. So the next step that you will do is take the back seams of both of these. I like to put my seam of one piece to one side and the seam of that to the other. So I join them together like so, starting at the back with wrong sides together, right? So the wrong sides are facing each other so that you have the outside of the cap and the lovely satin on the inside of your cap. And you're going to start at the center back and you will baste. Now remember, you have a 1/4 inch seam allowance here. So within the 1/4 inch, okay, so that it doesn't show up at the end, inside of there, you're going to baste. I set my machine to the maximum for basting in the stitch length. And here's where it helps that you have the stretch satin. If you notice, the notch on my stretch satin right now, because it stretches, is a little bit further than the notch on the cap. But as I start to sew, the cotton will keep giving and they will eventually line up. So if you start here, and if you need to hand baste or pin it in place beforehand, you know, by all means do that. But I just freehand it. I'll start here, and I always backstitch. If each seam that I make, I backstitch at the end and at the beginning. So I'm going to basically stitch all around to secure them in place and join them so that they become one piece. And there's my center front, and again the side, and then we'll return to the center back at the end. Okay, so now the 2 caps are joined together. You can see my basting stitch all along the very edge, making sure that they're joined. And again, don't worry about this raw edge. We're about to hide it. So now we take the headband itself Notice it has a center front notch at the bottom of it. This would be the part that's exposed, and this is the bottom that's on the inside of your cap. What I like to do is I join my pieces at the center back, and I fold this in half. And then at the fold, I do a tiny little snippet with my shears. It just gives me a notch at the center. I mean, you can do that from the beginning. I could add it to the pattern piece, but really all you need to do is fold it, find the center, and do a little snippet. The reason I do that is because you're now going to stitch a 1/4 inch, just like you did for the center back of the cap. At the center back of the headband tie, actually just headband because your ties are ribbons. At the center back of the headband, you're going to stitch only up to that notch. You're going to close this. The side that has the notch at the bottom, that's the one that you're going to close. Then you're going to back stitch, and then you're going to leave it open to pick up only the very top of the seam there. And I'm going to stitch it now, and I'm going to show you what in the world it is I'm talking about, because it might not be making any sense to you right now. All right, so here's what I was talking about. On the same side where you have the notch, you will stitch up to that little notch that you created. I'm going to cut this, that little notch, and then I back stitched, and then I lifted my needle and slid over to the top. Of course, I was sewing this way, right? So let me see if it makes sense. I stitch here, back stitch, lift my needle, move over, and just stitch this part closed. And this is why. As you may know if you watch my other videos, this ponytail cap does not require a buttonhole, which makes life easier, especially for people that don't know how to make buttonholes. So what you do at this point is you're going to open up that seam. Notice how there's a hole now because we didn't stitch that part. So you're going to leave this part open. This is going to be on the outside of your ponytail cap. This is going to be on the inside next to your skin. So here, now you're going to go back to the sewing machine, and you're going to stitch from the top, back stitch a couple stitches, down, cross over to the other side, turn your piece around, and then sew back up. So you're basically going to secure this fabric in place by stitching around it and creating a pseudo buttonhole on the outside without actually having to create one. And your ribbons will come out through this hole. So let's do that now. Okay, so now that that's done, you can see how it looks clean on the outside and it's held in place so the fabric won't be poking out as you pull the ribbons through when you're wearing it. So you're going to take the center back of the headband and the center back of the cap, and you're going to join them together. Now you're going to put everything facing up, both of the right sides facing up. So you're going to put the lining touching the right side of the headband. You're going to match your center back seam, and you're basically going to now stitch them together using the 1/4 inch seam allowance. So this is your headband open. Match your center back seams. This ideally on the headband you want to be open. Since the bottom is open, you don't want to have this closed because it's going to create a funky little thing there. So open up your seam all the way. You can even just press it with your finger and match that, and you're going to stitch. Again, you can pin beforehand or you can baste in place, whatever you need. And notice how this headband is slightly smaller, so you're going to be pulling. You have the center front notch, so you want to make sure that you end up matching this to the center front of your cap right there. But you will pull a little bit on this to make it easier when you go to turn it. So let's stitch them together now. So now that the headband is attached to the cap, it's time to get your iron out. You are going to turn your cap and you're going to press all your seams towards your headband. So you're going to be taking your iron. I recommend two things: that you use steam and that you test the heat of your iron on a scrap piece of your satin so that you don't burn it. If you're using polyester satin, the heat tolerance of this will be much lower than for cotton. You can go very hot with cotton and nothing will happen. If you go too hot on the synthetic polyester, you will melt it, and you don't want to do that. now that you've done all of this work. So go ahead and test the heat and the steam on a scrap piece of satin before you go to your actual cap. So you're going to press all of this all the way around the perimeter of the cap. Then you're going to flip your cap so you see the other side of the headband, and you're going to turn up and press. Now I stress over and over again not to skip this step. If you try to freehand it, it just won't be as neat, and you will end up stretching this fabric even more as you try to do it freehand in front of the machine. So if I were you, I would press a 1/4 inch so that you don't even have to worry about that when you go to sew. You're going to press it all the way around. When you come to the back, make sure that you're catching everything and you're pressing there. All right. And then once you have pressed that, you've pressed the headband, the seams in towards the headband, and you've pressed that, you're going to stitch the headband right on top of the seam you just made. So if this is the seam, you're going to take the folded headband and you're going to stitch right on top of it. However, you're only going to stitch from the side notch to the side notch through the back, meaning you are not going to stitch the headband closed in the front of the cap. That's so that we can insert our ribbon. We will close that seam afterwards. So again, seam here, press there, press the seam, and go from this notch, stitch all the way around to the other notch of the side. All right, so this is what I was talking about. I have gone ahead and pressed my seams towards the headband. I turned up a 1/4 inch all along the headband, and I've stitched from the notch that was on your pattern piece at the side right there, through the back, as close to the edge, through center back, up to the other notch, which is now underneath that seam. And notice that I basically went right up to the seam that I had already done, right up to it. I used that as my guide and stitched as close as possible to the edge. And this is what it looks like in the inside. In some places it goes on the lining, and some other places it goes on the side, but it's okay because this is the inside and that doesn't matter as much. So that's what it looks like at this point. And notice that the little buttonhole, pseudo buttonhole that you created is on the outside of your cap. That's what you want. At this point, you're going to take a safety pin and you're going to take your ribbons. Now I've cut 2 ribbons about 21.5 inches long. I've angled the edges that are going to be on the outside, and I have taken a lighter and melted the edges. This is a polyester ribbon, so you can melt them as opposed to burn them, and that will seal the edges so that they will not fray. So you're going to do that on both sides. So at this point, you're going to take the flat side of your ribbon, and I like to go deep enough in case it starts to fray and to pull, maybe almost a 1/2 inch into the ribbon, and you're going to thread it towards one side through the hole. So you start at center back and you're going to feed it all the way to the end. When you get to the end, you're going to just pull it, make sure that you've cleared it, take it off. Do the same thing on the other side again, and notice how, you know, it gets a little bit weak, so that's why you want to go close to the, not too close to the edge rather. You're going to do the other side now. Okay, now you want to make sure, use your finger to make sure that the ribbon is straight on both sides. Okay, and then you're going to take the edge of your ribbon and carefully pull it, retract it, so it's about 3/4 of an inch from that seam. So about that much. You want to give yourself enough that you don't lose it when you're wearing it or even when you're trying to sew it in place. So this one, we're going to take this ribbon and we're going to retract it about that much. Okay, that's good enough. These ribbons, I put them 21.5, almost 22 inches. I think that they are long enough. If you find that you need them to be longer, then you can adjust accordingly. If you want them shorter, you can always cut and reburn the ends. So at this point, now that they're both there, make sure that you don't accidentally pull them out. We are going to now finish this seam, and this is the last seam before we're done. I like to start on this side, which is basically where I left off when I was stitching. So what you're going to do is you're going to go to your machine and you're going to come from the edge, back stitch, and go straight. You're basically going to sandwich this ribbon in place. You're going to come in a straight line perpendicular to your headband. So you're going to stitch here until you meet the seam that you already created, at which point you will turn your headband, you'll turn your cap, and you will now that the ribbon is secure, you will continue to close your headband like we did before. And when you get to this point, to secure this side, you will stop, backstitch if you want to, and at that point do a 90-degree turn and finish in a straight line to hold this ribbon side in place. Backstitch there, and you will be done. All right, so this is your final product. And I've also gone ahead and taken my iron and just pressed the headband along the way because there was no crease before, so I created a nice crease on my headband. And yeah, I would ask again that you do not use these tutorials or these patterns for profit. It's something that takes me a long time to put together, and these patterns that I do are for those that work in the field or are doing it as donations or out of the kindness of their hearts to help those that either can't afford it or even as thank you gifts. But please don't use these for profit. You can buy these already made on my shop or give it a shot. I hope that you do give it a shot and that it comes out great. And if you have any comments or questions or always any other videos you want me to put together, feel free to use the comment section for that. And until next time, bye-bye.